in Scientizing new mobile, social, and wearable technology, or Scientizing daily life with new social, mobile, and wearable technology. And so the way that this talk is going to be structured is that I'm going to first start by telling you about the framework that guides my work, which is Scientizing, and I'll tell you about the 4 building blocks that I found in my work for supporting learners Scientizing. And then I'll tell you about the 2 projects in which I'm applying this framework. The first we'll talk about seamless Scientizing in a project called Science Everywhere, and then I'll tell you about my work in Scientizing the body with a project called Body Biz. And I will close with future. So my goal in my work is to help learners to develop identities and dispositions in STEM. And this is important because we want to help learners to begin to become scientifically literate citizens who don't just consume information about the world blindly, but who critically consume information and begin to produce their own new information through asking questions, designing their own new experiments, developing claims, discussing their theories with others, and things like that. So I want to help learners begin to do this by helping them explore potential roles that they can play in science, whether they choose to pursue those roles professionally, such as pursuing professional careers in science and STEM, or whether they choose to use scientific inquiry in their everyday lives. So to illustrate what Scientizing means, let's take Candace for an example. Candace was a 6th grader when I first began to work with her, and she was having some trouble in her science class. She didn't really like her teacher. She didn't feel like her teacher liked her. She thought science was hard. It wasn't connected to her life. It was, kind of boring and irrelevant, things like that. So as a result, she said that she wasn't a quote-unquote sciencey type of person. When Candace began to participate in our kitchen chemistry after-school program where kids are learning science and scientific inquiry skills through cooking, making, and perfecting dishes. So as Candace began to participate in this program, she began to see another role that she could play, and that was the role of an investigator. And she said investigators are people who solve problems, they find out how the world works, right? They, investigate things. And she said, me and my friends in the kitchen chemistry program, we're good investigators. And so she saw how through using science for cooking, she saw how it could be personally related to her. And Candace describes this herself in saying,
what do you want to grow up? I wanted to be I've been thinking about being a chef now in KSI. I think that'd be a really interesting job.
What makes you think that?
Because, if I'm a chef, then most chefs just put ingredients in there, but if I'm a chef, my food is turned out exactly the way I want it, and it'll probably be even better than I expected because I'll actually think about the way I wanted it instead of just putting ingredients in there and following a recipe. But I can change up the ingredients because I'll know what the thickness do and I'll know what these type of liquids do. Yeah, so I can change it up to get it the way I want it specifically.
Okay. All right. So as an interviewer, I'm like, okay, but on the inside, I'm like jumping up and down. Like, yes, this is what we want, right? So in essence, what Candace was beginning to do was she was beginning to scientize her daily life experiences, right? And so what that means is that she was beginning to find practical applications of science. And when she saw those applications, she was beginning to use them to achieve her own personally relevant goals. So she basically was beginning to see the world through scientific lenses. And so as learners have more and more scientizing experiences, as that becomes a consistent practice in their lives, they develop scientific dispositions. And so I define dispositions as values of, ideas about, and ways of participating in a particular discipline, specifically science, that come frequently, that come consciously, and that come voluntarily. The scientizing dispositions are not the norm for many learners. So many learners are like Candace. They find science to be, boring, irrelevant, and disconnected from their lives. But what if it was, right? What if it were the norm, right? Then maybe kids would use it outside on the playground with their friends, right? Or maybe some would use it as they're at home interacting with their siblings. Or even better yet, maybe some might help their parents in the grocery store and in shops, deciding on what kinds of ingredients or what kinds of cleaning materials and things like that to get, right? But in order for scientizing to become the norm, we have to move beyond only emphasizing abstract facts and formulas and really help learners begin to connect science personally to their lives. And that also means that we have to move beyond the classroom, right? And we have to help learners to see how science and scientific inquiry can be relevant to their lives across contexts. So here's the part that Cindy said she wanted to know more about, I think. So what I do a lot to advance this goal is to develop life-relevant learning programs and technologies, right? And so these are programs and technologies that help learners begin to identify and explore potential roles that they can play in science and STEM, and help them to find ways that they can do this in their own unique ways and personally meaningful ways to them. So in my work in designing life-relevant learning programs and technologies and surveying the disposition literature, I've identified 4 building blocks to promoting learners' STEM dispositions. The first is helping learners have the procedural and conceptual understanding that's needed for having the competence to actually engage in the scientific inquiry practices, to know when it's relevant and things like that. The next is helping learners to develop the interest, right, this curiosity about the world, right? They wanted to know more about how the world works and what makes things happen, right, and delve into new experiences. But then there's also social interactions, and those are important for helping learners to have communities of peers, of adults, of others that value scientific inquiry practices that they can engage in inquiry with. And then finally are the personal connections that are necessary for helping learners to begin to value the practices of scientific inquiry and really develop commitment to engaging in it, even when it's not the most easy thing to do or the most convenient thing to do, right? But that they would have a commitment to engaging in it. And in my work in the kitchen chemistry program and studying life-relevant learning programs in general, I found that life-relevant learning environments can be places where these building blocks of disposition begin to come together to promote learners' scientizing. But we all know that technology shapes our experience, right? Many of us are here on our devices and things like that. And can you imagine, like, what if you had your devices and you could take them everywhere you go and you could snap pictures, you could snap video, you could draw, you could do things like that, and those pictures of your everyday life could become data that you might use later for an experiment. Or maybe you could share it with your friends and start up a new social scientific investigation, right? Well, that's where we are right now, right? So in my first project, where we look at seamless scientizing through the Science Everywhere project, this is the future that we're trying to advance. So in this project, we are developing a social media app and interactive community displays that help learners to capture and share the scientific inquiry that they're doing across their life context, so across home, across school, and across after-school settings and community settings. So I have a great team of collaborators to work with on this project. In particular, my co-PIs, June An and Jason Yip. June is from the University of Maryland, and Jason is now at the University of Washington. And we have a great group of graduate students from education and the I-schools at University of Maryland and UW. So our work in this project really focuses on helping learners in low socioeconomic communities, because we know that there are systemic obstacles that these learners face to scientizing their daily life experiences. So policy research has really made this clear in stating how parents in higher socioeconomic groups tend to spend more of their disposable income on out-of-school opportunities for their children. Yet many learners in low socioeconomic communities don't have these same opportunities. So you face a wider gap, right, of opportunities for what's available to our learners. But at the same time, we know that learners in low socioeconomic communities have a lot of resources, a lot of really rich resources that they can draw from, right? And so we believe that social media can begin to make these resources visible. So let's take, for example, this video post that one learner created in our social media app.
Okay, my question is, do milk have sugar? Well, when I looked, it said, hold on, just a minute. Yeah, the ingredient is right here. Why would milk have sugar? If that thing drops on it, so it don't have sugar, but it got. Okay,
let me clean up. Let me back over on the counter.
Do a flat-based and vitamin D. Well, it don't got sugar.
And so what we can see from this example is not the most complex scientific inquiry, right, that you've ever seen anyone do, right? The language that he uses isn't necessarily the language that you would typically think of when you're thinking about scientific inquiry practices, but it's a start, right? Like, he took an everyday experience in an after-school or in a summer camp program where he was sitting at breakfast eating and wondering if milk, what were the ingredients in milk, right? And so we want to begin to make these resources that learners are drawing from, these interests that they're building from, available so that learners can actually recognize and identify them. And that is what we're trying to do in this project. So one big question that we're asking then is how can we design new technologies to bring entire neighborhoods together to support learners scientizing? So this is actually a huge challenge because many times in urban, low socioeconomic communities, the classrooms emphasize directive and controlling pedagogy, and so it can be really hard for teachers in really structured environments to begin to identify the funds of knowledge that their children, their students, are bringing to the table and begin to leverage those funds of knowledge. And then at the same time, as I said, parents and mentors and communities are really having these rich experiences with their children, but they often need help recognizing how these can be relevant for learning and STEM learning more specifically. This is even an issue for learning scientists, right? So this is my collaborator, June An, and he kind of grapples with this with his own 3-year-old daughter, right? So he makes posts on Facebook when, his daughter is asking him these questions and he doesn't know the answer to them. He doesn't know how, he's really grappling with how as a parent do I really spur her learning forward. And so he's found social media to actually be really helpful in his process. So what we're doing in this project is we're actually partnering with a local Title I school and a teacher in that school, as well as a local church that's right down the street from that school that hosts after-school programming for the children that go to this school. And we're also partnering with parents and the children's parents to help them to begin to help their children scientize. And we're deeply integrating the social media app and community displays in these settings to help learners begin to develop the information flows that showcase the science that they're doing, and help them to begin to build on those experiences. But we know that technology alone is not enough, right? Like, if we just have the technology and just integrate it into the community, you still need to have coordinated practices in each of these contexts that begin to help learners to bring these experiences together. So the second question that we're asking is how can we promote these coordinated practices between contexts, right, that help learners to build support networks with scientizing technologies. So we are building the Science Everywhere app, and of course right now this is really an initial, it's not an initial app, it's developed through an iterative process, but it's really, it's not your very futuristic social media app, right? But what we're trying to do is really learn about what types of processes and information flows need to be in place so that when we get to those futuristic technologies, we know how to effectively support learning with them. So in Science Everywhere, learners can create text, they can create photos, and in previous versions they could collect video. We're implementing that in the current version now as well, in drawing. And they can actually comment on one another's posts, they can give each other fist bumps and things like that. And it prompts them, as they make posts, to think about it from a scientific perspective. So it gives them prompts like, I realized, or I noticed, or I think this is because, and things like that. And so in developing this technology, we take a design-based research process. So my process has started out with really trying to understand how disposition development happens. And based on that understanding, to design new socio-technical systems that would support learners scientizing across contexts, or their disposition development across contexts, implementing these socio-technical systems in the community, and then further understanding more about disposition development and how we can design these socio-technical systems. So we've gone through a 3-year iterative design process up to now of the Science Everywhere app. It started out as a tool called Sync that really focused on helping learners to share and post questions that they had about the world, design new experiments and think about hypotheses that they had about these questions, and then to begin to develop projects so they could begin to answer their questions. So after some iterations on that, we came to the Science Kit design, which emphasizes more of a social networking feature, kind of visual layout, but still emphasizes helping learners to create questions and new projects and things like that. So now with the Science Everywhere app, the name has changed because now instead of only implementing this technology in after-school programs or in our specific programs, we're giving learners this access to this app across the context of their lives. So now they can not only use it in our Science Everywhere program, but they can also use it at home. They'll be using it at their school and in their community more generally. So this project consists of a weekly after-school program where children come together and we have life-relevant STEM learning experiences that include kitchen chemistry, that include Minecraft clubs where they're thinking about engineering and design through Minecraft. This past semester, we've actually been focusing on aerospace engineering or flight because one of our volunteers for the project actually is a student at the University of Maryland in aerospace engineering, and he's brought some of his research to the kids, and we've developed some learning activities that help them to think about how flight works through making paper airplanes. And then we just have fun, right? So some sessions we just have hangout sessions with the kids. But we also do design work with the children and with the families and with the teachers that we're working with, right? So we engage them in participatory design of the technologies that we're working on, and we also hold workshops with parents so that we can brainstorm ways that parents can develop the coordinated practices that will be necessary for helping their children to begin to scientize at home and connecting what they're doing at home to what they're doing at school and what they're doing in the community. So this is our community. Actually, as of last year, we have new people now, but researchers in our program serve as facilitators. We also have a science teacher that partners with us that serves as a facilitator in the program as well as our community partner, the outreach director from the church that we work with and volunteers from the church. We have about 25 to 30 youth that participate each week that go to the local public schools. Some of them go to different schools. We actually started out with a focus on middle school learners, but what we saw happen was that as we brought the parents in, the parents said, hey, I really love that my middle school child is participating in this. Can my elementary school child participate too? And so we've got a rate of kids ranging from 6 to 15 years old. And so now what I'll do is I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you about some preliminary findings that we've come up with from this, that we've developed from this study. Now this is very preliminary work that's still ongoing, so I welcome your feedback. But I just want to give you an idea of what some of the issues and opportunities that we're seeing are with respect to the information flows and coordinated practices in this community. So I'm going to do that by introducing you to, or sharing two vignettes of two learners with you. So first we'll talk about De'Ara, and De'Ara is a 7th grader. In Science Everywhere, De'Ara makes codes that are a lot like what we anticipate or what we try to prompt the learners for, right? So she makes step-by-step observations in the program. So for example, in this post, she says when we use baking soda and cream of tartar, the mixture started to fizz, things like that. So it's exactly what we prompted them to. She also responds well and at home to the challenges that we give the learners. So each week we'll tend to give them challenges that relate to what we've been doing in the program. So for example, if we're doing kitchen chemistry, we might say, find some different breads in your house and think about what ingredients are in those breads and make posts and share about that. So she does this really well. She actually does it really, really well. She really makes some complex observations here. So this one, she says guar gum. I might not even get all of this right, you guys. But guar gum, also called guarred, is a galactomannan. It's primarily the ground endosperm of guar beans. The guar seeds are dehusked, milled, and screened to obtain the guar gum. She has a reference there. It is typically produced as a free-flowing off-white powder. So probably what she did was found this online, right? She looked at the bread, she looked up the ingredients, found it online, and made posts about it, right? We also noticed that with De'Ara, she had less social posts. So looking at her posts during spring of 2015, we saw that she really only had maybe like one social post, and that was responding to a challenge that we specifically gave them to tell us about their favorite time in Science Everywhere. So that was when they had to make us cool, basically. So she really enjoyed doing that. She actually made a visual in another app and then posted that on Science Everywhere. And it's interesting because this kind of correlates with interviews that we've done with her mom, because her mom has told us in 2 interviews that, she really enjoys what the kids are doing. She really likes that the kids have the experiences in Science Everywhere, but she wants to see the children be more serious about science, right? She wants it to be more structured, right? More kind of like school, right? So she really enjoys when we give them like specific challenges, when we show them, the curriculum of what the kids are going to be learning and things like that, right? But what her mom also noticed was that, when we were on a trip this summer, De'Ara and her twin sister, they went to all these science places. So we went to an arboretum, we went to, all these other places, and they were taking photos and things like that. And she asked them, well, do you guys want to post about this on Science Everywhere? And they said, oh no, Mom, it's not really relevant for Science Everywhere. So the challenges may actually be narrowing kind of their perspective of what science is and what counts as science on Science Everywhere. And in addition, with respect to the coordinated practices, we're saying that we often have to help the parents begin to recognize science in everyday life in the ways that it may look very different from what you traditionally think of in school. So next we have Joanna. And Joanna is one of the younger learners whose parent came to us and said, hey, you know, I love that my older son is participating in this program. Can Joanna participate? And who can resist that face? So Joanna, actually in Science Everywhere, Joanna also made scientific posts, right? So we see in this picture here that she's taking measurements of how far her plane flew, and she's actually laying down on the ground here to measure, to take the precise measurement, right, of how far their plane went. But she often didn't have the words to talk about it, right? So even in the midst of all these pictures, her text says, we posted too much for us. And I don't really know what that means. But I think one of the things about Joanna is that she's an English language learner. So the language may be a harder challenge, more of a challenge for her. But what we did see was that when we moved away from Science Everywhere, she did find science everywhere, right? So she actually, she would post pictures of trips, vacations that they took. You know, she posted this picture of some frog eggs, and we definitely didn't have any frog eggs in Science Everywhere. But she was, finding these different things. I mean, she took pictures. This one she says, is this how eggs of frogs look like? And then in this picture, she's taking pictures at home where she's noticing kind of the difference between the two breads that she has on the stove, and she says, there's something in there. I know there's something in there, right? And so even though, so she has these really, she's finding scientific examples in all these places. She'll take pictures of her brother's science experiments and things like that and post them to Science Everywhere. But in the midst of all these posts that she has where she's seeing science are a lot of social posts, right? So she will have individual conversations with learners that we don't really get, that, she's posting on Science Everywhere, even though she's finding all these different other science examples. So in terms of supporting learners' information flows, to help an educator, to help a teacher begin to identify, the science that Joanna is doing, well, they may need to look in more non-traditional ways, right? So look and see what kinds of informal experiences she's having, and they may not look right. They may not have the scientific language yet or things like that, but she could definitely build on that. And then in addition, a teacher or a parent may also need some help with the presentation of the things that she is making, so that they can begin to really identify all the scientific posts that she is making and pull them out of these sort of posts that we don't know what they mean. So then, kind of overall with this project, some of the things that we're seeing are that with teachers, the information flows and connected practices can really help teachers to begin to identify the non-traditional skills and interests that learners have and begin to recognize them in new ways. So, for example, if Joanna may have problems, we don't know this, but Joanna may have challenges. Articulating her understanding in science class, but maybe if a teacher could see some of the posts that she's making outside of science class through these other means, such as pictures and drawings and things like that, she may be able to recognize Joanna in new ways. And then in terms of the community, one of the things that we're often doing in Science Everywhere is we're always looking at learners' posts and seeing what they're doing to begin to think about how can we leverage this in our informal space, right? How can we help learners to spur their investigations forward, right? If they're interested in these things with Minecraft, how can we use this to help them to develop a new experiment or investigation? And then at home, we're often working with the parents on helping their children to encourage their children to make posts and to think about science in these new contexts, and to help them to begin to notice deeper things in the context. So, for example, with Joanna noticing the types of breads, right, that they're and the ways that the breads are reacting, and we've observed that the parents in interviews have told us that they tend to just naturally do this with their younger kids, but not as much with the older kids, and the older kids also need help. So our future work then involves extending this analysis to really understand how those information flows and connected practices are coming together with the current technologies and what that means for the design of our system and for seamless scientizing systems more generally. And we're also in the process of developing large displays that will visualize learners' posts in their communities, right? So we'll have we actually just received a large display and interactive overlay, right? That a touchscreen overlay that will be housed in the local community center, so that the community can interact with the learners' posts and help them spur things forward. And then also that one that will be housed at the school, and we're actually working with the teacher on designing ways that it could be used in the school. And so we're also working with the teacher on integrating use of the Science Everywhere app in her classroom for her lessons, so that she can begin to see learners' participation in her class and in the Science Everywhere program. Okay. So that then sums up the part of the talk about seamless scientizing. And now I'll move to the project on scientizing the body with wearables. And this project is really, it's kind of different for me, because typically I start out with a big problem, right? Learners are not interested and engaged in science, or, we're having this big problem. But this project for me actually started with an opportunity. So the question we had here was, okay, what if our clothes could reveal how our bodies worked, right? What if it revealed the insides of our bodies? And how could this change the way that we learn about our organs and our organ functions? And then how could this tool become a platform for scientizing, right, and scientific inquiry? So with that, then we began to develop live physiological sensing and visualization tools it's a mouthful, so we call it LPSV tools, that actually sense and visualize learners' physiological data in real time. So again, I have a great group of collaborators that I'm working with on this project as well. Collaborators from computer science, the iSchool, and education. This project is actually led by PI John Fralick, who he and his senior grad student actually built the initial prototype for this. And our big question that we're considering with this project is how can LPSV tools support learners' personally relevant and collaborative STEM learning experiences? So as an interdisciplinary project, across computer science, specifically HCI and the learning sciences, we have a broad range of interaction design and learning goals, but specifically I'll focus on these four. So we aim to support children's learning about their organs and their organ functions, also supporting their active and playful hands-on engagement, right, building on embodied learning approaches. And then we also want to support their scientific inquiry and their personally relevant experiences in STEM. So we're building on the work of others who have begun to use personal fitness trackers, to engage children in STEM learning. So, for example, in Victor Lee's work, he's talked about how children will begin to engage in really complex math analysis when they have fitness trackers that they're wearing all the time across contexts, right? They'll begin to think about new experiments, investigating how sports how different sports might impact your physical activity, looking at their everyday life activity and things like that. And also exergaming approaches build on children's their interest and engagement in games to promote their learning about personal health and to promote their physical activity as well. So we're building on those approaches. And we really aim to support learners' collaborative inquiry in small groups, as well as their collective inquiry in whole groups. So along those lines, then, we have developed two prototype LPSV tools. One is the BodyViz shirt, and then the second is the SharedViz large display. So actually, both tools work with a Zephyr bioharness that actually fits around a child's waist, or fits around anyone's waist that wears it. It has to actually touch their skin, so they have to wear it like under their shirts. And then the BodyViz shirt is it's a visual display that goes over it, and it has a phone in the stomach, and there's the Arduino Unos that power it are housed in this pouch inside of the shirt. So we actually began to have taken an iterative process in developing the shirt, doing participatory design in an intergenerational design group with children and adults. And we've developed, we're on our third prototype of the tool. So now I'll show you a video that will tell you more about the different iterations, and you can actually see BodyViz in action.
Our first prototype sense and visualize the user's heart rate. Wearers can also view their digestive organs. Prototype 2 added airflow visualizations and flattened organs. We informally elicited feedback from our co-designers and at our local mini maker fair. Prototype 3 offers new and additional sensing and visualization. The heart and lungs visualize wearers' live heart rate and breathing rate. The snack time button initiates the digestive system visualization. A video illustrates food breakdown in the stomach. In this case, we use an apple slice. Sound effects indicate the end of digestion. Magnetic removable organs allow children to explore different layers of the human body. Outlines and colored highlighters guide the reattachment of organs, which automatically begin working if placed in the proper position. We interviewed teachers and conducted single-session field deployments with children to gain feedback on our designs.
And so what we found in our initial deployments of the BodyViz shirt was that with freeform activity, we saw that the shirt could actually support learners' curiosity about their bodies and how their bodies work, but also about the technology and how the shirt itself works. So here's a little video to show you something.
Here's the hard part, beat how you're breathing.
Did you look at it?
I'm back. Is that shirt connected to like yeah. Look at the heart. On here, his heart is beating really. His heart is beating slow. So we're gonna give you guys.
And so there's even though that we see that there's several limitations to the BodyViz shirt. First, when learners want to begin to make comparisons across learners, like looking at the way that the shirt visualizes the data, it's hard for learners to actually compare across learners and actually see changes over time. So we need more support for quantitative analysis and helping learners to see their data over time. So to begin to address some of these needs, we've actually developed the shared viz system, which actually works with the same bioharness, but it visualizes learners' data to a large display system. So we actually have 3 designs within the shared viz system that range from first, like helping learners to understand basic physiology and anatomy, so they can actually just see it works with the Connect. So when they stand in front, when they're wearing the bioharness and they stand in front of the system, they can actually see their heart beating inside of the skeleton in real time. They can see the numbers of it and it actually moves with them. We also have a moving graphs design that helps learners to think about the structures and processes across animals, so they can see like their breathing. They can see their breathing rate and what their breathing rate would be if they were an elephant or different animals. And then the one that we'll focus on today is moving graphs. And so in moving graphs, it helps them to begin to relate their health and their organ function to human activity. Okay, so in moving graphs, the learners can actually see their heart rate visualized in real time. So this is seconds ago, so that would be 60 seconds ago to current. They see it on a line graph. And up to 6 wearers can have their data visualized simultaneously with the shared viz system. And here is a video of moving graphs.
You're about 185 or 190.
So I really enjoy these because they help me get all my steps too. That's right. But so with ShareViz, we're really aiming to support learners' collective inquiry, right? So we're trying to help them to engage in collaborative negotiation, to begin to work towards common goals, to build on each other's ideas, and then also to develop this community repository of knowledge that they interact around. And this we're building on the work of embodied learner researchers like Tom Moore and Chris Quintana and Michelle Louis. There's their Evo Room system that uses large displays to visualize simulations of rainforests, for example, over millions of years. And as we began to design the shared viz system, we actually really started focusing as well on developing learning activities for LPSV tools, including BodyViz and SharedViz. So to do this, we actually we've been doing participatory design sessions with our interdisciplinary design team of children and adults. And our children have really emphasized competitions and games and doing explorations of new types of physical activities. But we also did participatory design sessions with teachers. So we had we've done focus groups with 20 teachers that are in a STEM leadership Masters of Education program. And in our focus groups with the teachers around learning activities with LPSV tools, they actually emphasize, similar to the children, explorations, right? So the power of helping learners, of enabling learners to just really explore different activities and things they could do with the tools. They actually suggested having children brainstorm about physical activities that they wanted to try, and they also emphasized the power of LPSV tools for helping children to understand a variety of STEM topics, right, including mathematics analysis and learning about systems and other things like that. So based on these participatory design sessions, we actually designed a series of or a learning activity for ShareViz and that we've used with ShareViz and BodyViz. So first, we have learners work in small groups to brainstorm physical activities that they think they have to come up with two sets of activities. One that they think will really raise their heart rates and breathing rates, and then one that they think will actually make their heart rates and breathing rates go lower. They then have to make predictions about which of those activities that they brainstorm they think would make their heart rate rise the most, or the heart rate and breathing rate rise the most, and which they think would make it decrease the most. And so once they have their predictions, they actually test them out with the ShareViz or BodyViz systems. And then in whole groups, we actually discuss the results and what's happening. So with BodyViz, we've actually done single session deployments with both tools to really understand what kinds of personally relevant and collaborative experiences children have. So we've done two sessions in after school programs. One of those programs was Science Everywhere. We had one session with a combined second and third grade class, and we had a total of 61 children ages 5 to 13 years old. So with BodyViz, the children worked in small groups to brainstorm their activities, and then we only have 2 shirts right now, so we had two volunteers to wear the shirt, and each group had to tell the wearers what activity to do to try to test their activities out. So. But then with SharedViz, we've done six sessions in an after-school program. They're all single session deployments as well. We had a total of 69 children, ages 5 to 13. We actually had children with SharedViz divide up into wearer and non-wearer pairs. So each group had a wearer and had a non-wearer, at least one non-wearer. And so the non-wearers were charged with being the reporters. So they had to observe and notice things that were going on and write down their observations. So now I'll tell you about our findings. So in terms of personal relevance, we saw that learners used both tools to come up with physical activities that were interesting and relevant to them in their daily lives, right? So they thought about things like playing video games and reading books and of course jumping up and down, one of their favorites. But with BodyViz, we saw that learners actually began to consider the social and emotional effects on their heart rate and breathing rate. So, for example, one group said, have the wearers do the Macarena, and so they thought that would raise their heart rates. So the wearers actually said, well, doing the Macarena, it did raise our heart rates, but not only because it was a high impact activity, but also because I was embarrassed. It was all like, well, you guys watching me do this dance, right? So we saw that actually across all of our BodyViz sessions that they really began to consider, right, their nervousness or their embarrassment or the social emotional context on their heart rate and breathing rate. We actually saw this in the Science Everywhere session. We gave the learners a challenge to go home and we showed them a pulse rate monitor. So we had them take their pulse. We told them to try different activities. and take their pulse and see how it affected their heart rate. So we saw that one learner continue to this line of thinking about the social and emotional context in a post later on that evening or the next day. He said, watching the NBA Summer League second game brought my heart rate down after running because less blood must be pumped when I'm just sitting down and not stressing my muscles and lungs, breathing hard, and also the fact that the game was just Summer League and not the NBA. It didn't stress me for my team to win. So he's connecting, right, like his level of excitement, right, about, and how that affected his heart rate. And then with ShareViz, we saw that the tight connections between learners' bodies and the visualization really served as a personally motivating aspect of the system for them. And also games and competitions as well. So we saw that in each session, whenever the moving grass came up, learners immediately started running and jumping and doing all kinds of physical activity, right? And we also saw that with the games and competitions, it really helped the non-wearers to remain engaged because the non-wearers actually would want their team to win. So because they were paired up with wearers, they would actually cheer on and encourage and even do some of the exercises themselves, right, to help out their teammates. And so now we'll turn to collaboration. For collaboration, we saw that both groups collaborated in discussing brainstorming the activities. They actually would come up with this unknown categories where they would say, I wonder what eating does, or I wonder what, how this activity affects my heart rate. And it was interesting because sometimes as facilitators, we didn't even know the answer, right? But luckily they got to test it out too and see. So with BodyViz, we saw that learners would engage in discussions about the activity after each trial. So, for example, in one group they thought that if the wearer laid down on a yoga mat and spread out his arms, that would decrease his heart rate. But they actually found that increased his heart rate. And so they started thinking as a whole group about how, he's got to use some muscles so that he can be stabilized on this ball. And so maybe his muscles need that blood to flow. And so it would increase his heart and breathing rate. And so we also saw then that sometimes as the groups progressed, as they actually tried out different activities, the groups would change their predictions about what they thought would be would raise or lower their heart rates the most. And then with ShareViz, we saw that that conversational collaboration happened between the non-wearers, especially because they were charged with being the reporters, so they would often help each other out, noticing different things and making sure they jotted down different things. But with the wearers, we saw that collaboration really mainly happened through physical action. So the wearers, because they were doing jumping jacks and burpees and high knees and everything like that, we don't really talk all that much when we do high knees and burpees and things like that, right? It gets kind of hard, right? So they were really focused on the physical activity. But what would happen is that the non-wearers were actually looking at the graphs and seeing who was most successful, and then they would call out or either model the activity for their teammate to begin to do. And so what would happen is that the physical activity would then proliferate throughout the group, whichever one was the most effective. Okay. So then returning to our question of how LPSV tools can support learners' personally relevant and collaborative experiences in STEM, we saw that in terms of personal relevance, learners began to connect their everyday activity to their organ function, whereas in prior work, when looking at fitness trackers and things like that, they tend to connect the physical activity to the data about that actual physical activity. With LPSV tools, they can connect it to organ function. And we also saw that they began to connect social and emotional factors, right? And we think that the real-time visualizations, because they have access to that data in real time, they can actually think about all the aspects that they might have forgotten about later, right? So the fact that I was nervous or embarrassed, right? The fact that, I don't know, the wind was blowing, whatever was happening in that moment that we tend to forget, it's there, it's then in the moment, so the kids could actually think about it then. And then in terms of collaboration, we saw that learners engaged in collective noticing and experimentation and making predictions, right? So kind of more front-end exploratory scientific inquiry practices, right? We saw that that the non-wearers especially engaged in collective discussion, but that the collective physical activity really served to help learners to collaborate, right? So the wearers actually collaborated through physical activity. But we also found that we really have to consider the social and emotional context with LPSV tools, right? So with the BodyViz tool, it actually puts the spotlight more so on learners because they're actually wearing the visualization. And so this can be an opportunity, right, for learners to think about like the social and emotional context and how that relates to their organ function. But it also might cause some learners to be discomforted and maybe not want to wear the body viz tool. Though we have a lot of kids. We never have a lack of volunteers to wear it, but there will be some people who won't volunteer because of that. So we suggest having multiple types of wearer experiences. So with the shared viz tool, the visualization is actually on the large display. So it's not so much of a spotlight on learners themselves. And so then there are a couple of implications from this. First, that learners need, because the tools actually support the exploratory aspects of scientific inquiry, learners need both formal and informal time with the tools. They need time where they can just interact and play and do their own thing, but also time where they're actually going deeper into why this is happening and what are the causes of it. And they also need opportunities to both wear and observe. When we first started designing shared viz, the ultimate vision was we thought that only having 6 wearers was sort of a limitation, and that the ultimate vision was that everybody would eventually, would wear the tool at the same time. So imagine all of us in here wearing sensors and seeing our data visualized. But I think what our findings are showing is that it's also powerful for children to have the opportunity to observe. And so learners need opportunities to sort of rotate between those roles so that they can observe and begin to interpret the graphs and think about what's going on. And then also facilitators may need to model their inquiry practices because typically with these types of large scale embodied displays that you're modeling simulations, right? And so you kind of have an expectation of what are the range of different things people can test and people might ask and things like that. But with LPSV tools, children can try anything, right? And so the discussion could go in all types of directions with different types of activities. And so a facilitator may not know what's going to happen in every moment or even why. And so they have to be comfortable with modeling those types of inquiry practices. So our future work then involves having a multiple session deployment. So having learners engage with body viz and shared viz tools over a series of weeks. And actually leveraging what we've learned about how the learners interact with them to integrate the tools in effective ways. So then in returning to the Scientizing framework and really helping learners begin to see the world through scientific lenses, these projects both have complementing strengths, right? So whereas body viz serves as this tool for helping learners to actually measure their science or measure and engage in new experiences, right? Like measure their results and things like that. The Science Everywhere project helps learners to begin to connect these experiences across contexts, to share them with the world, right? To begin to build on them in other contexts. And so with that, I would like to thank my awesome collaborators. We take great selfies, I think. and also thank the National Science Foundation for funding this work. And open the floor for questions.